consider to be very much a newlywed. And that's Charlie Potter of the BamaOnline.com staff. Charlie does a great job covering the Crimson Tide for BOL. So what about it, Charlie? You're still pretty fresh from your honeymoon. I got to think from what, a couple years ago maybe? Where did you and the lovely wife honeymoon following the nuptials?
Yeah, we went to the Bahamas. We went to Exuma down there where they have the swimming pigs, and it was great. You had the all-inclusive resort, so you didn't have to pay for drinks necessarily, or at least I kept telling myself that. And yeah, we had a great time down there on the beach. This summer will be 3 years. It seems like it was just this past summer, but it's crazy to say that out loud. It'll be 3 years come June. It's
marital bliss is what that's called, when you're still honeymooning 3 years later. That's a very, very good thing. Now, Charlie, let's talk about some short honeymoons, and I guess that would involve the Alabama football staff from 2018. Some guys checked in, checked out, and with that, you have an overhaul of a staff once again. I know you have an update at BamaOnline.com right now involving the defensive side of the ball, and it sounds like, Charlie, based on your update, Alabama could be inflicting some more damage to Joe Moorhead and that Mississippi State staff.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it already, they're likely to pull Charles Huff away from Starkville. He's the guy that's already said that he's going to be recruiting the DMV for Alabama, even though no official announcements have been set. But these guys have been all over social media. But the latest buzz is Alabama might go back to Starkville again and take away Mississippi State's defensive line coach, Brian Baker. Alabama doesn't currently have a defensive line opening, although some of these defensive positions that are now vacant will become vacant. That was something that Nick Saban hoped to wait until after National Signing Day to do. But that's the latest name that's been linked, and it's one that's catching some steam. I know you've mentioned before that guys like Freddie Roach and Bo Davis are possibilities, and this is the latest one as a candidate, and he seems like a pretty strong candidate. So we'll continue to monitor it. It seems like it's an every hour thing where something new pops up, but that's the latest right there for the coaching search.
Now, Charlie, you were down in Mobile this week for Senior Bowl activities, practices. Unfortunately, though, Nick Saban's scheduled appearance before the media, I guess on Wednesday, was washed out. Did we hear anything else from Nick Saban this week down there, though, that might have been of particular interest to Alabama fans?
Not too much, no. You're right. It was pouring in Mobile on Wednesday. I tried to get out of there once I realized that we weren't going to have any availability with Saban at Wednesday's practice. They moved the practice from Lad Peebles Stadium to South Alabama's indoor facility, and that really limited them on what they could do for sideline access. And there's a small army of NFL personnel down there. They had to limit them as well. So no Saban, but he talked a little bit on the NFL Network, mostly about the guys that are in Mobile, and Ross Pierce-Baker and Isaiah Buggs. And then in Montgomery last night, he spoke, with Simone Neal of CBS 42. She went and got an exclusive with him, really smart on her part. And he didn't say much. He talked about the coaching staff turnover. And one thing that he did mention I thought was very interesting is that he's looking to rebuild the program to what they want it to be. And you kind of see that with a mixture of experience and ace recruiters, guys that he's adding to his staff or expected to be adding to his staff right now. So nothing groundbreaking from Saban. We won't get him again until National Signing Day in a couple weeks. But it's always interesting when he does talk. I know the drive down to Mobile seemed like it wasn't as much worth it without getting to talk to him at the Senior Bowl practice.
What about Alabama's participants down there? Isaiah Buggs and Ross Piersbacher, really limited number of Alabama guys with all the underclassmen coming out this year. But what's been the buzz maybe about Ross Piersbacher? Is his versatility something that NFL teams like? He started at a couple of different positions. And Buggs, we talked about him a little bit there at the end of the first segment in terms of how he just seems to be a guy who does a lot of things well. Maybe nothing great, but checks a lot of the boxes in terms of being just a solid all-around player.
Yeah, just starting with Buggs, he was actually named the Senior Bowl's Defensive Lineman Practice Player of the Week, and they named 10 players from a bunch of different positions and an overall player. And Bugs was one of those 10. And, that's saying something. You're going out and having only 3 days of practice, short turnaround from a national championship game, and, going out there and performing well in front of a ton of NFL personnel. He's a guy that can play multiple positions along the front, and that's something I think he's wanting to prove this week is his versatility. And, Jim Nagy, the executive director, talked about how he was very hard to block this week, and there's some really good offensive linemen in Mobile. I think for the North team, which he's going to be facing off against on Saturday, and it'll be really telling. He's mentioned a couple of times, Nagy has, that this is potentially the best offensive line unit that they've assembled. And, we'll see how Bugs performs against them. And the ad practice, it's been kind of business as usual. He's been going up against Ross Pierschbaker, and Ross is a guy that said that he's going to focus on center, but he's wanting to get a couple of snaps in at guard this week. We saw that from some of the videos released from Mobile. And, again, his versatility is something he wants to show off. There's not really much for Ross to do. I think, the interviews are going to be key to him because he's a guy that has a ton of tape out there. And he has 57 starts to his name. He's a guy that if they have questions, they're going to be off the field, and there really aren't any questions for that either. So it could be a pretty dull week for Ross just in terms of what he's being asked and what he's being asked to do, very minuscule things. But, small group. Christian Miller showed up yesterday to do some interviews. He's still dealing with that hamstring injury, but he talked to the NFL Network and said that, rehab's going good, and he should be ready to roll for the combine, so that's good news for him.
Talking with Charlie Potter, the Alabama beat reporter for BamaOnline.com, part of the 247sports.com network, on a Friday edition of Southern Fried Sports presented by Carty and Lloyd Attorneys at Law and Mercedes-Benz of Tuscaloosa. What about this Alabama men's basketball team, Charlie? Coming off just an absolute dominant performance, wire to wire, its best performance, you have to think, of the 2018-2019 season, in really just demolishing Ole Miss on Tuesday night. Are we at a point where we can trust this team, Charlie, heading to Waco tomorrow? Do you feel like they've turned a corner, perhaps, and now we're going to see sort of the play across the board, specifically John Petty, the way he's played the last couple of games? Do you think this team is ready to really take it to another level with the game against Baylor tomorrow?
Maybe. That's kind of the question we've asked for a while now. It would be really big for them to avoid an upset and a disappointing performance and go out and play really well in Waco, though. Baylor's a team. They have a similar record to Alabama. They're 12-6, I think 4-2 in league play. They're coming off of 3 straight wins. If you look at them, they have a pretty loaded non-conference schedule. They lost to Ole Miss earlier in the season. Just for comparison's sake, they beat Arizona, and they're coming off of 3 straight wins, like I said. So this would be a game that if Alabama's going to start to put it together and some of the tough games they have coming up, including this one, it'll be really big for them to avoid the disappointment and to go out there and put another win up on the board and to try to string some wins together. I'm I'm not ready to say that I'm looking for some consistency because that's been something we've talked about since I've been at BOL really about this men's basketball team. But they showed signs of a program that can go out and beat anybody in the country. And if they can continue this, then they'll certainly be dancing in March, that's for sure.
This is a team that's actually put together some decent win streaks this season already. You had the 5-game stretch there in December into early January of some nice wins, and then lost a couple in a row, win, loss, win in the last 3. And I guess a lot of this continues to hinge on guys like John Petty, right? 45 points in the last 2 games. What's going on with John Petty? Why the reason for the improved play? Is it strictly about this guy being streaky? What is he doing the last couple of games that we hadn't seen him do enough of?
Yeah, he mentioned that he had been working on his shot, and I think a lot of that has to do with confidence. And coming off a win like this, that's something that you don't want to have too much of, but you don't want to lose it either. You kind of want to bottle up what happened against Ole Miss, and I think avoiding complacency for this team is really key. Something that Avery Johnson said numerous times this season and throughout his career, and it's starting to become a joke on Twitter a little bit, is the tale of 2 halves, and that's what we've seen from Alabama. It's been good in the first half and then trail off in the second, or have a really bad first half and pick things up in the second half. They need to put that together like they did against Ole Miss and be consistent. And, that's kind of the theme that we were just talking about is, can you expect that from this team? They've shown signs of it. It hasn't been, something that you think they can maintain throughout the whole season. But if he can continue to be confident, not overconfident, and just go out and find his shot, John Petty and the way he's playing will be really big for this Alabama men's basketball team. Dante Hall is playing really well. Carl Lewis is continuing to develop and to come into his own. If they can get some productive minutes from Herbert Jones and Tevin Mack, this team will be tough to beat. And I think just getting to that consistency level, avoiding complacency and not getting too high off of this big win will be really big for this team.
You mentioned Herbert Jones, another second-year guy to go along with John Petty. How would you sort of describe or evaluate Herb Jones's second season to this point?
It's been a sophomore slump of sorts. He's a guy that he wasn't going out there and leading the team in scoring by any means last year because obviously you had Colin Sexton and John Petty was still around. But, he's a guy that they could get some points from. And now I think he's stepped into a bigger role. And it's almost just like a mental thing. You can kind of see with him, he's just making uncharacteristic mistakes because he's a very sound player. You see that on the defensive end and how many charges that he draws throughout the season. He has a high basketball IQ. He knows what he's doing. He has an athletic frame. But one thing that Avery Johnson said, heading into the Ole Miss game is that he's thinking a little bit too much. Whenever him, and not only him, it's other guys too. And this goes back to that consistency level. If they can continue to do this, they'll be okay. Is that they're pulling up and trying to make flashy plays from the mid range or things like that. Whenever they have an easy pass inside for a dunk. And with his 6'7" frame, wingspan of 7 feet, and his athleticism and power, Herbert Jones should be finishing on these instead of trying to do a layup or something fancy. And I think if he's just settles down, doesn't overthink things, and plays his game, he'll be better off. And if they can get that out of Herbert Jones, then I think this team could be on a more consistent basis and be able to pull off some more of these wins and string together some of them.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot, but 8 points and 8 boards from Herbert on Tuesday night against Ole Miss. That was good to see. That's the type of production that you kind of have for him as a baseline going into this season, and it's been similar in some ways to what we saw even with Braxton Key a year ago. Although I think Braxton had some injury issues that he was dealing with as well. Well, Charlie, as always, it's a lot of fun to catch up with you. It's always insightful. It's always appreciated here on SFS. Give Charlie a follow on Twitter, by the way, at Charlie_Potter, POTTER. Again, check out that coaching update Charlie has right now for BOL members at BamaOnline.com involving the defensive side of the ball for the Crimson Tide. Hey, Charlie, have a great weekend. We'll catch up with you again next week.
All right, man. Thanks for having me.